District babies are the best babies.
The district? The Central?
Can we talk about the South End got the most culture?
And how we came up with the gigs dance?
But West Seattle really got the gigger team.
This is Seattle from the inside out. From the inside out.
What's good, Seattle? Welcome to our 8th episode of the Youth Insider Podcast from the Inside Out, sponsored by Southeast Network. Shout out to our sponsors. Today, we will be discussing gentrification and its effects on our community. But before we get into that, we have a very special guest with us today. Now, this guest has been active in the community, heavy stepping through every section in the streets, for the last 55 years. Some of you may know him as our former council member. Some of you may know him as LG from the CD. Today we have Larry Gossett. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, and I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you. So before we get into gentrification and community and define that, for our listeners, where are you from?
I was born in Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
way back during the Second World War II. And I've been here all my life.
Okay. And then, so what part of Seattle are you specifically from? Where did you grow up?
Well, we're going to be talking about housing today. So when I came along, Black people didn't have too many options about where they lived. So my mother and father took me home from King County Hospital. Today, you all call it Harborview.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hospital for the poor. And we went straight to the housing project. So I grew up in High Point from the time I was born until I was 11 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad got enough money to get a house. And he could not get a house in West Seattle because they said we don't show Negroes houses in West Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved to the central area where all the other Blacks of Seattle lived at that time. I'm talking about 1956. And I went to Horace Mann Elementary School, Washington Junior High School, Garfield High School, and I'm a graduate of Franklin High School. And then after Franklin, I went to the University of Washington. So I've never lived over 5 miles from any school, K, through the university.
Mm. That's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So for our listeners who don't know, High Point is a housing project over in West Seattle. So even though High Point is West Seattle, High Point is considered High Point, but it's not considered a West Seattle, the West Seattle neighborhood versus the central area, which he spoke on is the Central District. For people who aren't from Seattle or who don't know, the Central District is East Seattle.
And it's Seattle's historic Black community, too.
Got it. So can you dive into what the Central District was and a little bit of High Point too, for when you grew up in those neighborhoods?
When I grew up in High Point, it was a place where the newest immigrants to Seattle came. Those mostly Blacks trying to escape the racial terror of the South, and we were moving to the north.
Mm-hmm.
During World War II, about 1.5 million Blacks left the South because opportunities for work and other things opened up. In Seattle, it was Boeing, Todd Shipyard, Bethlehem Steel. So our parents came up here to get better jobs. My mother and father were sharecroppers, so they were used to working from 6 in the morning, 6 in the evening, and sometimes the white man would give them $1. My daddy was pretty excited when he got to Seattle, Washington in 1944, and he got a job at Todd Shipyard for $1 an hour. So he made $8. They were the lowest paid workers in Seattle, but man, that $8 was way more than that $1 he was getting picking cotton down south. And that's the kind of economic opportunity or initiative that exists is to have so many Black people live the South. High Point had by the time I moved out of High Point, it was about 30% Black. Yeah, a housing project, just like we're here in Rainier Vista. But back in those days, Rainier Vista, High Point, Holly Park, and Yesler Terrace, everybody that lived there were people that lived at or below the poverty level. Central area was, the statistics I have on the Central area harken up to 1961 because there was a big controversy because Martin Luther King Jr. visited Seattle in 61. And I was a sophomore at Garfield, and he came to speak to us, and he told us, we didn't know, he said that Seattle is now the 5th most segregated city in all of the land. He said that 88% of all the Black families of Seattle live in the central area. And characteristically or geographically, that was about 14th Avenue to 34th, west to east. And then south to north, it was Jackson to about Madison or John Street. That, my brothers and sisters, was the definition of the central area at that time. By 1960, it was about 20,000 Black people that lived in Seattle, and about 16,000 of us lived in the CD. Most of us lived in housing projects. And I already told you I went to Horace Mann, which is right across the street from Garfield, 25th and Cherry. When I graduated from Horace Mann in 1957, my graduating class was 99% African American. But all the teachers at Horace Mann were white. So the only whites we ever saw back in the day were our teachers. And sometimes later when I got an adult, people say, wow, man, you from Seattle. What are you talking about? You never saw whites when you was young. They didn't understand that. But it was because of the housing segregation that existed in our city at that time. Like most other Black males, when I was in junior high and high school, the cool things to do it was not school. It was to be in the gangs. Baby Cobras, Junior Cobras, and Senior Cobras was the main gang in the Seattle central area in the 50s and the early 60s. Or sports. The Rotary Boys Club, we're in Rainier Vista Boys and Girls Club now. Back then, it was just the Rotary Boys Club. Wasn't no girls allowed in. From the time I was in the 7th grade at Washington, like 7th grade till sophomore at Garfield, I played basketball for the Rotary Boys Club with some guys that we never, ever lost one game. 18-0 my 7th grade, 20-0 8th grade, 21-0 senior. The third year I was at Washington. And then Garfield, the 3 years I was in high school, even though I graduated from Franklin, Garfield won the state championship. 1961, 1962, 63. But even though we had a lot of success in basketball, I would say about 65% of the Black kids at Garfield graduated. We had difficulties relating to the public education system here in Seattle. It wasn't relevant. When Martin Luther King came, we had never heard anything about civil rights or Black history or anything like that. We were shocked when he told us that Black was beautiful. Nobody talked like that in Seattle in 1960, 61. He was here November 8th through 10th, 1961, with Martin Luther King. And they wouldn't let him speak downtown because they thought he was an outside agitator. So he spoke at Garfield, and at Temple de Hirsch was the only big church that allowed Martin Luther King to speak. And that was Jewish Church on 15th and Union. And about 1,000 people flowed in there to watch him speak. At Garfield, we had about 1,500 students in 61, and all the students, we got to hear him speak. But he was here to initiate an open housing movement. And that's why Reverend Samuel B. McKinney and Mount Zion Baptist Church invited him. They had gone to Morehouse together, and he invited Martin to come out to Seattle, Washington. So you can go to your next question. I think that's enough. So
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that was my growing up as a young cat. I went to college because I wanted to play basketball. I didn't go to college because of any, academic reason. Like this beautiful sister's going there for academics. I was going because I wanted to play basketball.
I feel it. Thank you. That was very insightful.
Yeah.
And so, kind of like branching more out to the community and just like kind of get our co-host perspectives on like the community. For like you guys, like what does the South End mean to you?
For me, I had no idea that like behind like the history of how pretty much the South End was kind of formed. I didn't know that everybody pretty much started in CD and then like spread to the South End. I didn't know that.
This was Italian mostly, and Irish whites lived out here in the 50s.
Yeah, I pretty much like found out the same thing to my grandmother, like broke it down to me. Because she came from Mississippi, but she moved
About what year?
She came from Mississippi, I want to say about like in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
And then she lived in Yakima, and then she didn't come out here until like the late 60s. She came out to Seattle like the late 60s.
Okay.
And then and then they started moving to the South End.
I feel it. So like just like listening to you talk, like I pulled like the biggest thing I pulled from that was like the speech that MLK gave you guys at Garfield.
Yeah.
Like my thing is like I'm from Seattle. You obviously know my like family background, so we've been here.
Yeah, I know your mother and your grandmother.
We've been here for a long time. And
I know
so,
her mother and grandmother.
So like when I like leave Seattle, I talk to other people. Like when I tell them I'm from Seattle, they're like, oh, there's black people in Seattle.
Yeah.
Oh, Seattle. There's a.
That's the problem
Seattle?
I had when I started traveling around the U.S. I still got cats in New York City when I was a Vista volunteer because I joined Vista. That's how I first got out of Seattle. And I would tell them I'm from Seattle, Washington, but they say, oh, yeah, man, I was in Washington, D.C. last year. That's the hookup. They thought I was down, 4 hours down from New York.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, but what I was saying is just like the thing that really stuck out to me is like the fact that MLK came all the way up here to Seattle and then told you guys who live in Seattle that Seattle's like top 5, like one of the most segregated cities in the United States. Yes. And so I feel like because of, the small population of minorities here, especially like black people here, it's like people outside of Seattle and people who like move to Seattle, like they kind of like sweep our issues under the rug. Right. And
they sweep what?
Our issues. So like they like treat our issues like it's not that big of a deal. So like gangs, gun violence, and like, just many other things that we deal with in the community. So like going into gentrification, I feel like from my perspective, gentrification like probably, I'm not going to say impacts Seattle the most, but we're affected by I would say like one of the fastest rates out of like all the like major migration cities in the United States, just because of how small our population is here. So like for people listening and who don't know, like in a sentence or two, like what is gentrification?
Yeah. Okay. I was definitely prepared for that question. So I got it out of Webster's dictionary, and this may surprise y'all. So I want to talk about what gentrification is, and then what most people think gentrification is, if that's all right. And hopefully that'll generate some discussion between the 5 of us. This is the Webster definition of gentrification. First definition: the process of renovating and improving a house or district so that it conforms to middle-class taste. Yeah, I was shocked when I read that. And I read this morning. The process of renovating and improving a house or a district so that it conforms to middle-class taste. And then the second definition was making a person or activity more refined and polite. That's the second definition.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then as I go around Seattle and other cities around the country and being involved in the movement for social change, and I got started by organizing the Black Student Union at the University of Washington School that you attend now. But within 4 months of organizing the Black Student Union at the University of Washington, we as young Black students, we said the university is racist to the tilt, man. We went to a conference in California and we got so excited in 1968 over having this cat from the Black Panther Party named Bobby Seale.
Was that at San Francisco University?
Yeah, San Francisco State.
Yeah.
That's good for you to remember that. We went to San Francisco State for a BSU conference. Bobby Seale was the keynote speaker. He was from across the water, Oakland. The foundation, the birth of the Black Panther Party is 1966 in Berkeley. We were at a Black Student Union conference at San Francisco State in April of 1968. Bobby was the keynote speaker. The first Panther to ever die had just been killed 2 days before that. His name was Bobby Hutton. They called him Little Bobby Hutton in a confrontation with the Black Panther Party. It was called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense because this was a revolutionary organization composed mostly of Black youth that were determined that their commitment to the Black Power movement was that we want to become the vanguard, the revolutionaries that stand up for Black people against the police and do whatever we can to make life better for our people in Oakland. But by the time we met Bobby, they had 13 chapters in California, none outside of California. And we said, we want Seattle to be the first place, brother man, that you establish a Black Panther Party outside. He really dug our enthusiasm. It was 23 of us that had gone to this Black youth conference at San Francisco State. All of us between the ages of 16 and 23. And then Bobby made a commitment to us to come up in April to Seattle, Washington. So he came up. We met at Aaron and Elmer Dixon's house. He was still elated about how enthusiastic this core group of 15, 20 Black youth were about starting a chapter in Seattle. And he okayed it and made Aaron Dixon the captain of the Black Panthers. So Black Power, and that was the late 60s, the first time I ever heard the term of gentrification. But before that, we mostly talked about why do Black people have to be segregated all in the same neighborhood? Why can't we have the choice of living outside in other communities? And then in the 1970s, Black people that worked for the Central Area Motivation Program, the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, all organizations that existed between 70 and 74 in Seattle, got together and demanded that Seattle open up housing so that Blacks could, and in that process of opening up housing opportunities for Black and other people of color in Seattle, they found that the main strategy for keeping Blacks out of neighborhoods in Seattle was called community covenants, COVENANTS, covenant. A covenant is a legal agreement that the whites that own housing in all the neighborhoods in Seattle, not all of them, but many of them, like Ballard, like Madison Park, and like Seward Park, like Wallingford. They said, if you sell a house or if you rent a apartment, you got to agree that you won't rent or sell to Negroes, and sometimes, because this was after World War II, Japanese, and sometimes they even had Jewish people in that covenant. So these were non-desirable, disfavored people that they didn't want. So we started a movement against redlining, and they called all that redlining. Separating, putting a line around housing, neighborhoods so that we can maintain them as segregated neighborhoods. And gentrification didn't really start in Seattle until the 1980s, because even Garfield was, when I went there in 60, it was 45% Black. And by 1975, Garfield was 80, 88, 85, 90% Black. It wasn't until the end that the whole school became Black. But there was no other high school. When I went to Franklin in 62, because my daddy got a little house on Beacon Hill, there were only 50 Black students there. Less than 5% of the students at Franklin were Blacks when I first went there. But all 11 of us on Franklin's basketball team in 1961 and 62 were Black.
Got it.
Yeah, and we were popular, and we came in second place. Who beat us?
Garfield.
Oh, you guys are smart. We never could beat the Bulldogs.
Bulldog.
Yeah, when I was in 11th and 12th grade.
That's crazy how like there's still a lot of Black athletes, but the student population isn't the same.
Oh,
That's
no,
how it
it's
was.
quite, where, at Garfield?
Yeah, and
No,
in
it isn't.
schools,
That's
yeah.
because of gentrification, though. And you guys haven't asked me any questions about how I think gentrification actually materialized in Seattle.
Oh no, we're gonna get into that.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. I'll let you.
So my next question is like, since you like explained your experience, just going to school and seeing gentrification as like somebody who's lived in the city for as long as you have,
Yeah,
right?
and I still live there.
Exactly, right. So for
Yep.
somebody who still lives in the city, what have the effects of gentrification been on you? Seeing your community change right before your eyes.
Yeah, well, I met when I was at the university, I met a very beautiful woman like this one over here to my right. And, how cats do, they fall in love. So I fell in love and got married in 1975. We wanted to have a house. So we rented in the central area, at that time. And then we moved to, then we got a house on 48th and Brandon, close to where her grandparents lived, who we already knew, to Patou's, because they moved here. Her grandparents moved here around.
Patou. Let's correct
Patou.
that.
What did
you've
I
been in the
say?
family too long.
What did I say?
Patou.
Oh, and it's Patou.
Patou, yeah.
Please accept my apology.
I just want to clarify that
Yeah.
for the listeners.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Met them, and by the time we moved to 48th and Brandon, they were living down off Rainier, off Brandon. So we became closer. We moved down to Rainier Valley, and by that time, Rainier Valley was becoming more and more third world, more and more Asians, more and more Blacks. People were moving into the Rainier Valley in the 70s, and it particularly expanded in the 80s. And then the first time that my wife and I got a chance to buy a house, though, it was back in the central area. So we moved to 27th and Alder. That's where I live now in 1982. And the block that we live on 27th was 92% African American from Cherry to Yesler. Today, when her mother picked me up, there's only 3 Black families that live on 27th between Cherry and Yesler now. Just 3 Black families. Everybody else is white. And when they moved in, they were able to get money from banks. Redlining banks used to not give our parents any money to fix up those old ghetto houses. But these young white professionals are getting loans, and they remodeled buku houses in the CD. And they built a lot of cosmopolitan-looking condos and apartment buildings, way more housing in the CD now than it was in the 1980s. And gradually, though, everybody that moved in, given this definition of renovating housing and moving into a mostly middle-class district, it became that. When Martin Luther King came there, when the Central Area Motivation Program was started in 1964 as an anti-poverty agency, the blacks in the Central Area, 55% of the families lived at or below the poverty. That's a very poor community. Today, it's down to 12% of all the families in the entire Central Area lives below the poverty. And the average income of everybody that lives in the Central Area today is up to $78,000 a year. And the Central Area is now 68% millennials. A millennial household is one where they're 21 to 39. So buku small, young families, mother, daddy, and little kid, but they overwhelmingly work at Amazon, Microsoft, downtown Seattle. When I became an elected official in 1993 and joined the King County Council in 93, between 93 and 98, at least 5 of my staff bought housing in the Central Area, but all 5 of them were white because they wanted to be close to work. And that's the problem with gentrification. The reason blacks get so upset about gentrification, y'all get nice houses in inner city communities, close to downtown, close to work. You're able to get money to fix it up. And then it becomes too expensive for the historic residents to live there. And they got to move all out to Skyway in King County. Skyway has more people of color, Latinos, Asians, and blacks than any other community in all of King County now, 67%. Federal Way High School is 60% black. Garfield, as she was alluding to earlier, is only 27% black now. Still all 11 or 12 of the basketball players are black. But and I don't know how they do that, and we're not here to talk about that. But it's a very small black population at Garfield High School now. And gentrification, when I was reading the definition, I told you, if I were to go around, or the 4 of you were to go around and ask people what is gentrification, and you ask all the people in Rainier Valley or Rainier Vista, they're not going to have this definition I gave y'all. Going to say, that's all where all white folks moving in, where we used to live, and we can't live there no more. That's how they're going to define gentrification. Because they don't know that this is what it means. I mean, this is probably what it means because it's mostly middle-class people, and this happens in inner-city communities all over the country. And the reason it happens because the vestiges of white supremacy that still exists in our country. You don't want disfavored people like blacks and other minorities living in your neighborhood. You figure out ways of keeping them out. But when you want their neighborhood, you hook it up where your kids can get the housing. You give them a loan, or the banks get them a loan. Ain't nobody gonna be stopping them from getting no loan. They graduate from the University of Washington, Seattle Pacific. And that's why people of color resent gentrification, because it has meant minority removal and white professionals, middle-class folks, able to have good houses in our inner city communities. We don't have to live way out in the suburbs.
Yeah, if you think about it, the definition of gentrification that you just read off, it's appealing to the middle class, and therefore it undermines the poor,
the historic residents. They didn't have any choice originally but to live there. My daddy got a job at the post office, the U.S. Post Office, as a mailman in 1955. And that was the best job my father, Naaman Gossett was his name. That's the best job he ever had. And he had 6 kids. Yeah, by 1955, he had 6 kids. But the post office was a good job. And then he's a pretty good hustler, so he figured out a way that my mother got a job there as a clerk. 2 blue-collar workers, but higher level blue-collar. So they was able to save enough money to get a house. And he worked at the West Seattle Post Office So logic, Daddy wants a house in West Seattle. And he went to a realtor, and the realtor said, that's not a realistic option for a Negro. They would run me out of business, Mr. Gossett, if I were to show you a house. Come on and get in the car and let me show you some houses. So Daddy went and got his car, and all the houses he showed him were in the CD. That's the only place. Wasn't it in 1968 that we got open housing in Seattle, where it became illegal to discriminate based on race in housing, both rental or selling? And it wasn't until the 1980s that it became popular amongst the white middle class to live in the inner city communities. And it became easier for them. It caused displacement, the moving out of the historic residence. So that they just got to go hit and miss. You know, a lot of young blacks that are even professionals, graduates of the year, they say, oh, Brother Gossett, we live in Tacoma. So that's the only place we can find a house that we can afford.
Yeah, for me, like when I talk about gentrification in the community, especially with like white people, like it makes me like very upset because it's like so we're already acknowledging that with the black community, not even just in Seattle, but like on a national level, we have like all these
and
struggles.
this is the problem in every big city across the country.
Right. It's like cities like Detroit, Chicago, like everybody's going through it. And so it's like, my thing is like you acknowledge the fact that we're going through all these struggles and hardships within the black community itself, like internally. And then so it's like we have people like, for example, like your parents or like even like my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, to where it's like they try to get homes in their own community, but these people are telling them that no, you can't get a home here, even if you do have the money for it. And then once we establish that home, like for example, I have a house, or not I have a house, but my family, we have like 3 houses in the CD right now. And so one of them is in the valley. And then so my great-great-grandfather and grandmother like worked very hard to like build that house and even just like own the house, and it's like still in the family right now. But then it's like weird for like, just for like, we had to jump all these unnecessary hurdles to get the house in the first place. And then now you're displacing everybody in the community and like telling us like
and that value
to go
is going
somewhere
up,
else.
so your taxes is going up. And if you're grandparents, you can't afford the taxes on a house that you might be in for 35, 40 years.
Right. And then so like these white people like moving into these neighborhoods, and these middle class people moving into these neighborhoods like don't really realize like the effects that it has like on our community as a whole. So like for example, like we'll take like a cup of water, for example. So like with that cup of water, all the water is housed within the cup. But if you take a smaller cup of water and like put that in the cup of water, then you're gonna get all this water that's displaced. Right. And so now you have all this water that's like scattered across the table and doesn't really have anywhere to go because they've been pushed out of the cup of water. And so it's like, for me, it's like, it just hurts me because it's like, especially my generation, our generation, right? We have like our parents who grew up in like the South End, who grew up in the CD, who grew up in West Seattle. And like, not to say our parents specifically, but their generation is like walking around with like these holes in their heart, like wondering what happened to their community. And then, so they're growing up, they're raising us, and they're like kind of holding on to the past, right? So like holding on to the CD, like we're in the CD every week, but we don't live in the CD no more. So like, why are we over there? But then it's like, that also has an effect on us too. And like on like literally everything that we do. So it's like anywhere from like gangbanging to even going to school. And it's like, you know, you have people nowadays where they're like, they don't know why they're gangbanging, right? But then like everything like has like a purpose to it. But we lose that connection because we don't get that message passed on to us like from the generation before us. So you have people who want to go to Garfield, they want to go to the beach, but they don't know why they want to go to Garfield, why they want to go to the beach. Just because their parents went to the beach and because their parents went to Garfield.
They don't
People
appreciate
they want to bang certain gangs like in the city and in West Seattle, but they don't really know the history behind the gangs that they're banging. And then so like for me, it's just like looking forward. Right? Like for us, like what are some things that you feel like we can do in our position as youth and becoming those adults? Like what are some things we can do to prevent gentrification from happening in the communities that we establish now and going forward?
It looked like the last time he started talking, you wanted to say something, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to say something first before I answer. his question.
So it is kind of hard preventing gentrification too, just because when people do buy houses and when the house value goes up for everybody, the property tax also goes up. And some
That's
people,
right.
say older people, they're already retired at this point and they're still living in the house that they've always lived in and they could always keep up with. But now, like, gentrification's happening. Their property tax is going up, so they can't really afford it anymore. So now at this point, they're basically forced to leaving and selling their house to, say, white people or middle class people, and even like investors that are trying to tear down their house to build apartments and just gentrify the whole area in general. So at this point, like, you can't really tell anything just because it's happening, and sometimes we don't really have any control of it. But I feel like if there are people that could hold on to their property, you should. So yeah.
Yeah, because I feel like it's a form of systematic racism.
Yeah.
Like you said, like the house property, the property tax will go up, but so does the value of the house. When gentrification happens, like the property of the house goes up, it's gonna be more money. It's almost like a mind game, and they put it right in front of you.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna cost more to live here, but now you can sell your house for a lot of money. So what are you gonna do? And a lot of people, that's really our problem.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, we see that check, and it's, that offer.
It's like you mentioned that like there's younger people now in the Central District that like probably work
Not
for
colored,
Amazon.
though.
Yeah, white people. They probably work for Amazon or Microsoft. But how I look at it is like, how did they get those jobs? Like, basically,
Also because of the
it's
way
because
white
of the
supremacy
system
works.
and like how
Right.
They got into
their
college.
education system is for them, not for us. So it's like pretty much it's the root that is pretty much setting us up for failure. And when it comes, we're not ready for it. We're not prepared for the gentrification because, it was pretty much made for our own failure. Like, we're not ready.
But I want to, based on you all's comments and his original question to me, I want to get to what I think young people can do. So I give you food for thought during this session too. Is that all right for me to go there now?
Yeah.
First of all, in 68 to 75, that was the first time that a lot of young people started getting involved in the movement. It was called the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement at that time. And like we started the Black Student Union at the UW in 68, but by 70, we had Black student unions in 18 other high schools in Seattle by the end of June of 68. We had them at Rainier Beach, Garfield, Chief Sealth, Franklin, Seattle Community College, North Seattle Community College, South Seattle Community College. We went everywhere organizing other people in our age group, said we got to be involved in this movement. And then in 68, when Sam Smith, this guy that got elected to the city council of Seattle, came and talked to us about a housing measure that he wanted to pass, we went door to door on behalf of his legislation in the Central area. 68, and in 1969 they wanted to build the freeway through the Central area and displace a whole lot of Black people in 69. And we got youth in the VSU, the Black Panther Party, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and just smaller youth groups around the community, and we all started working together. Sam Smith was the first Black man ever elected to elected office in Seattle, Washington, and he was on the city council. And then we helped him get legislation passed in the summer of 68, making it illegal to discriminate against people on the basis of race in the rental or selling of housing. And that's not a cure-all, but it was a step in the right direction. And then we started putting pressure on the city council, the county council in Washington State, to help give loans to working class Black families so they can buy houses. Now that Sam Smith got that anti-redlining legislation passed where they could make it a little easier to buy housing out in South Seattle and out in Mount Lake and in the University District and other places. And the youth just helped open it up. What I think is happening now, I was very excited about the response to George Floyd's killing on May 25th. On May 25th, 2020. Because so many young people hit the streets. And now the city council is talking about defunding the police and using the money to help the homeless get housing, helping to build housing for the poor and cooperative housing. Cooperative Commonwealth housing development is going on, and there's hundreds of young people going around stating that they want to support those efforts. And have a lot of more young people talking about putting pressure on the government to put money in the cooperative housing and rental assistance so that poor families can get some decent housing. Mm-hmm. But the rent and the government pays part of the rent or bring the rent down. And we got to do that more. I know out here in this housing program, only about 1/3 of these houses for poor people. There's no reason why we can't move that up to 50, 60% and then provide the money for more poor families to live in the Southeast Seattle if they want to, both in terms of rental or low cost integrated kind of housing purchase where you rent for 3 years and then if you're successful doing that, you get to own the pad you're living in. All those kinds of changes are taking place because young people like y'all are willing to do the research and articulate what you want and put pressures on the powers that be. Because the government had a lot to do with redlining existing. When the veterans got home from World War II, there were a lot of black veterans, but they couldn't take advantage of the GI Bill. Y'all ever heard of that?
GI.
Yeah,
what was this?
That means general enlisted person that joins the Army.
Oh.
And they gave loans to thousands of white veterans after World War II to buy housing. And then in 1949, they set up FHA, Federal Housing Authority. The government again provided loans to people to get housing. But because of the way that white supremacy worked in our society, they wouldn't give them money to housing in low-income black communities because they said those are dilapidated neighborhoods and we think it's a waste of money to give money there. But what that led to is 95% of the money going to white families and not more than 5% of FHA in the 40s and 50s and 60s going to black families. And they should have been eligible, but we lack political power. The majority of black people, if you think about the election that just ended, I know we're running out of time, the majority of black people in the United States of America could not vote until 1965. Again, that's because of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, CORE, Martin Luther King Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all these organizations putting pressure on the government to protect black people's rights to vote as it was, we were given in 1870 with the passage of the 15th Amendment. It guaranteed black ex-slaves the right to vote, but it didn't get enforced until 1965 in 13 states in this country. Now, I'd like to draw your attention to the race that just finished. There is no way that Joe Biden would be the new president of the United States of America if it weren't for the black vote. Mm-hmm. Man, he was losing in Michigan until they start counting those black votes in Detroit. Oh my God. He was getting 80 and 90% of them. And in Detroit's a place where 650,000 blacks live. That put him over the hump. Then they went to Pennsylvania. It took about 19 days, but they kept getting the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh votes. Again, overwhelmingly black or people of color. they went 88% for Biden, and he won. And then the last example I want to give you is Georgia. No Democrat had won Georgia since 1992. That long. And then they kept counting these votes from a county that surrounds Atlanta, Fulton County. Oh my God, because it's about 800,000 blacks that live in Fulton. They can vote now. And as a result, they were able to get him to become the victor in Georgia. Everybody said that's the reason that he's going to be the new president. And maybe if we put the right kind of pressure on him as young people and caring adults of all races, we can move the democratic experience along the way, particularly in the arena of housing, more so than we've been able to do in the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, like you said, from around the time from 1969 and 1975, more young people started getting involved in like
Black
groups.
power, civil rights, yeah.
So would you say like you see the same kind of things going now with all the changes you see the young people doing?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's after George Floyd got killed, way more, and I'm talking about white youth too.
Mm-hmm.
It's way more on the streets now than we ever had. In the 60s, we mostly had just blacks and Latinos and Native Americans. That's why in Seattle, I think he knows this, and you know this, we have the Gang of Four, Roberto Maestas, Bob Santos, Bernie Whiteberry, United Indians, and Larry Gossett from the Central Motivation Program. Those four got together in the 60s, and then we got all the minorities working together. That's the best, because the man would try to keep us divided if we don't build multiracial coalitions like that. And then I just told you, Biden and Kamala Harris did a very good job at doing that, and that's why they're in action. So for it to continue to work, we got to have people y'all's ages conscious enough and have the right kind of priorities within yourselves that you want to do this kind of political work. And then some of y'all need to be the ones that get elected in the future. Yeah.
That's deep.
I first got elected in 1972, and I was 23. And then later I became a member of the King County Council, and I stayed there for 25 years until I lost to a cat that was only 31 years old. I said, how you beat me? But that's the way it be going sometimes,
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
The pleasure was mine.
And then
For coming out.
I just wanted to like reflect, not even just reflect, but just like state like 4 things I pulled from today's episode, like for our community. So kind of like action items and things that people can research. So one is just like financial literacy is key to gentrification, and also just like a lot of the
Financial literacy.
a lot of the issues that happen in our community.
Be aware of how the money system works. Okay.
We need to educate people on like home ownership. So owning your home instead of like renting, like the effects and like
That's right.
what you can do. Also like a target demographic too, because one thing I did notice is like, so we talk about gentrification, right? And the displacement of black people, black and brown people in Seattle, but then we don't really talk a whole lot about like kind of like where we're going. So you mentioned that like Garfield now is like 27% black
27%
versus
black.
Federal Way is 60% black. So it's like, why are we focusing and putting all this energy into Seattle
Right.
and not
Where we
putting
were versus where we're at right now.
versus where we're like
Yeah.
actually at?
He's right.
And then the last one is just community code of conduct and like just like morals.
Community
like
what?
Code of conduct
Code
and
of
morals. So like kind of like where we
You want
stand
me
as
to
a
be
community.
good. Okay.
No, I was just like, this is just for our listeners. This is just for our listeners.
Oh,
So
okay.
like, and like any organizations out there,
Okay.
it's just like, like just like figuring out how we want to like operate and how we want our community to operate, but also what is a community and like what does it mean to us.
Very good.
Yeah. And then so just thank you for joining us today. Sudi, how can I reach us?
Our Instagram at SRB Youth Insider. Follow that, stay updated with our podcast and also events. So thank you guys. Thank you for being here.
How often do you have the podcast?
We drop it once a week.
Once a week on Mondays. Yep.
That's when it's on. What channel do I?
Oh, it's on
turn it to?
YouTube. YouTube.
It's
My
on
apologies.
YouTube.
We'll make sure to send you the link.
Okay, y'all send me the link.
Yep.
And then if our listeners or organizations want to reach out to you, is there any way?
Yeah, you can reach out to Larry Gossett at larrygossett09 at gmail.com.
Got it.
Yeah, that's my email. You can reach me, see what's going on. But because of the pandemic, and me being an old man, I'm in the house. But you can be active in the house. I talk to a lot of people, I got used to. I think y'all heard this word, Zoom. I had never heard of Zoom until we got this pandemic, and that's a good system of communicating.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you, Seattle, for listening. Stay groovy.
We out.